I think this is probably almost the first. I don't recall any of our talks going over the years specifically talking about a health app. I could be wrong. There's probably occasions where it was referenced, but not in this particular format. Anthony stressed for the occasion. You would hear Anthony...
I forgot my hat.
Yeah, you'd hear Anthony on the ABC occasionally. Is it periodic or regular or...?
Semi-regular. There's 3 of us or 4 of us that rotate the slot. So
with Raf mainly?
Yeah, with Raf, yeah. Or if you stay up really late on a Saturday night, occasionally on 3RRR on the party show, which is very interesting. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I don't drink anymore, but all the rest of them seem to be quite lubricated by the end of the 2-hour shift.
Well, Anthony, of course, has been a regular over the years in various sort of guises and doing various activities and so on. And he himself, I would never do this, but he himself has stated he is 20 k's lighter than prior to Christmas or even earlier than that.
No. I'll tell you as we go.
There you are. The story is unfolding. I'll leave it to Anthony. But welcome very much once again. I think we see you about once a year in terms of...
You do. I missed last year because there was a whole bunch of stuff going on in my life.
You were, yes, and you've reinvented yourself.
I'll try.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Ian. Round of applause for Ian. It's kind of interesting doing this talk because when people talk about exercise, everyone wants silver bullets. Like everyone wants to know what's the secret. Is it? I watched on the Sunday program on Channel 7 a few weeks ago. There was a guy talking about the 5-2 diet. We've got that celebrity chef guy, Pete Evans, who keeps talking about paleo. Michelle Bridges, who's making entire towns lose hundreds of kilograms of weight. And, I was saying to someone outside before, you can't walk into a bookshop now without seeing 15 Michelle Bridges, here is the secret to how to get healthy and fit books on a bookshelf. All I've figured out is that most of them are talking through their hats. There is no silver bullet. There is no universal solution that works for everybody. And because of that, what I'm really going to talk about tonight is a personal journey. So normally when we do this sort of, when I've spoken at iMug, we've picked a topic, whatever it is, and we've gone, here's all the stuff that I've learned about the topic over whatever period of time, and I share what I've learned, and off we go. So this is actually a bit more of a personal story about what I've gone through and where I was at. And I'm going to really start with where the story started for me. The other thing that I've learned, by the way, through this is that almost everybody is an expert and almost no one knows what they're talking about. There are so many myths and pseudoscience things that I've picked up over the last couple of years. It's just astonishing. I was just thinking about a few of my favourites, and these are a combination of things I've read, things that what we call in my family the Nonna network, which is the conventional wisdom of all the people over 65, and just the stuff that you hear in pop culture. I know there's a few of you that might be slightly older than 65, but it's the old wives' tale style of science and health stuff that comes through. A couple of the favourite ones are running is bad for your knees. Who's heard that one? How many of you believe it? Science says you're wrong.
Well, my body says something otherwise.
No, that's okay, but the science... And you know what? I say this with a slightly sore knee at the moment, which I've had to sort of manage.
My body says otherwise.
Yeah, running doesn't hurt your knees. Stuff hurts your knees and running may exacerbate it, but running doesn't directly cause trauma that wrecks your knees if you do it in a managed and proper program. Like anything, all good things in moderation. Weightlifting is bad for your back. I'm pretty sure that my back strength is better than it's ever been. And I'm lifting well in excess of my body weight in certain exercises. Swimming is the best exercise because it's no impact and blah, blah, blah. I've heard that one a million times. Swimming is the best. Hundreds of times I've been told that. Paleo, gluten-free diets, excepting for people who are celiac and obviously have to modify diets because of things, but things like the paleo diet, the gluten-free diets, 5-2. most of these are actually based on very loose science and anecdotal evidence. There's very little actually strong science that supports paleo, for example. This whole thing of our ancestors were people who wandered around and ate nuts and berries and the odd bit of meat. It kind of doesn't stick because it's actually not scientifically true. It's been disproven by anthropologists. It's been disproven by scientists who actually know how the human body works. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do. I'm just saying weigh it up because the science doesn't always back all the things that people say are true. Not everyone can exercise. I've heard a number of people tell me, I can't do it, it's too hard. Everyone can do exercise that works for them. Sorry, mate. Everyone can find a way to do some level of activity that works for them. It works for me by getting up in the morning and doing it first thing. If I decide to go for a run and I go, I'm not going to do it first thing, I'm going to do it in the afternoon, I either get too tired or too busy by the time the day's done. So for me, it's a first thing in the morning thing. Other people go, I can't do it first thing in the morning, I'm too tired. I can't move until I've had my third cup of coffee, all that sort of stuff. More power to you, as long as you find a way that works for you. So for me, it started on January the 6th, 2013. I know this date pretty closely because when I look back at my exercise log, and I actually track most of what I do reasonably closely, that's the day it started for me. It was the 6th of January, 2013. I was a couch potato. There's no other way of putting it. I weighed in at 108 kilos at 5'10", which put me by most measures on somewhere between obese and really, really, really unhealthily overweight. Not long before that, I'd gone to basketball training with my oldest son. So he's nearly 16 now, so it's a couple of years ago, he's 14. I went to basketball training with him, as I do most weeks. And we ran around a little bit, and while the kids were training, there was a couple of us were just, throwing basketballs around and participating in the training as you do sometimes with your kids. And I could not walk the next day. I kind of felt like I'd been shot in the butt. I went and saw my doctor, and he goes, "You've done a hammy." So, I couldn't believe it. Like, I'd never had that kind of intense injury pain. And I'd sprained ankles when I played squash in my youth, where my foot went black. This hurt like a whole new sort of way. And it kind of made me think, maybe I'm not as fit and robust as I used to be when I was in my 20s or 30s. So, recognition of what happens when you're getting closer to 50 than 30. So that's where it started for me. On January the 6th, 2013, 108 kilos, and I had to do something. And that something for me, and I'd run in the past, I kind of always enjoyed running. I know a lot of people like to go running and they stick headphones in and they go off into their own little world and do their own thing. For me, it's actually the opposite. For me, it's about quiet. When I'm running, even if I'm running on a road where there's traffic, I don't hear that traffic anymore. It gets blanked out, and I actually just completely get into my own space, and I'm able to process and think about stuff my own way. Sorry? I thought you were going to ask me something.
You don't hear the traffic.
I don't. I blank it out. It disappears. Yeah, I just don't hear it. It disappears. It doesn't matter where I run. And look, I don't always run on main roads. I run on trails. I run on near the beach. I run all over the place. I run wherever I go. But when I'm running near a main road, I just don't hear it. All that stuff that's going on around me just disappears. And it's a chance for me to be alone in my thoughts and to process stuff myself. So I started with this thing called, most of you have heard about this thing called Couch to 5K. Has anyone not heard of the Couch to 5K program? Okay, I'm going to run through what it is really quickly. Couch to 5K is not really for Couch to 5K. The idea is it's meant to get you to running in a 9-week program from never not being able to run at all to being able to run 5 kilometres. Okay? It's actually not about the 5Ks, it's about 30 minutes of continuous movement. That's what it actually does. So I'm going to do one of these things that Les hates in slides, and he's put a whole bunch of information on one big slide in a table. But just really quickly, Couch to 5K in summary says, look, in the first week, all you're going to do 3 times in that week is devote half an hour where you're going to walk for 90 seconds and run for 60. So all you're going to do is going to walk for 90 seconds. There's an app. You put your headphones on. It's the only time I used headphones when I ran. the app says walk, and you walk for 90 seconds, and then it says run, and you run for 60, and then it says stop and walk, and you walk for 90, and you repeat that 7 times or so. There's a 5-minute walk at the start just to get you warmed up, a 5-minute walk at the end. It's 30 minutes, you're done and dusted. That's your first week, you repeat that 3 times. So you can go on a Monday morning, a Wednesday. I was doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Sometimes it would, because of life getting in the way of things, I'd go Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday or whatever, but that was it. The second week, it goes from 90 and 60 walking and running to 2 minutes of walking, but 1.5 minutes of running. When I started this, I couldn't run the 60 seconds. I really battled to get through the 60 seconds. Sorry, man. Killing you for a second.
Okay. Can I ask, you've got the headphones, you've got the app.
Yep.
And are there audible cues that tell you 15, 30, 45?
It actually cues you. Yeah, it cues you and says, right, you're now going. In fact, some of the neat stuff that happens with these, there are literally hundreds of Couch to 5K apps. Hundreds. You can pay for them, and there are free ones. There's this whole thing that's kind of become a technology trend over the last few years, and it's infiltrating the exercise world, called gamification, where they put the kinds of things that people do in games to keep them engaged in playing a game, they're applying into exercise. So what they're doing, for example, with Couch to 5K apps, is that you find that there's ones called Zombie Run. So instead of saying run and walk, it says the zombies are catching you, you better hurry up. So you run, and then it says, right, the zombies are far away now, you can walk again. So instead of saying walk, run, it goes zombies close, zombies far. Stuff like that. Or you can accumulate points and stuff. You know, there are all sorts of different ways to make this entertaining that people are doing. My thing is, if you're going to try the Couch to 5K thing, and I reckon for me, this was the beginning. This meant I could attack the task of trying to get a little bit fitter with something that I had a target at the end, which was the 30 minutes, and I had a set of steps that guided me through it so that I didn't have to go, it's all too hard. I didn't try to run for 30 minutes the first day and collapse after 10 and go, that's it, I'm done. It was in bite-sized chunks that were achievable for me. And if you think about any significant endeavour that you've done in your life, there are always milestones along the way that help you achieve it. I mean, if you've worked in big work projects, there are milestones in that project that you do. The people that climb Mount Everest don't start at the top and go, magic, I'm here. They start at the bottom, and it's a step at a time. You know, all major endeavours require you to set some achievable milestones as you go. And this, for me, was the program that worked. It guides your way through. Eventually, by the time you get to halfway through, you're running 8 minutes at a time with a 5-minute break in the middle. So run for 8 minutes, walk for 5 minutes, run for 8 minutes. And then you slowly add a couple of minutes at a time to each of your runs until by the end you're running for 30 minutes. And the theory is if you're running for 30 minutes, you're probably going to make 5Ks. But if you're not, it doesn't matter. The neat thing was, you know, if you got to a point where you go, actually, you know what, I couldn't do it today, you just repeat the day. There's no policeman that says, right, you failed the program, you're out. You can repeat a day and just keep on going. So it's achievable, it's your own progress. I find doing it with someone else, whether that's someone who's with you or physically with you when you're doing the activity, or someone that you can talk to online or over the phone to say, how'd you go today? I think that's a great way of encouraging each other through it. But having a program that just broke it down into bite-sized chunks was the big difference for me.
Can I just ask, if we look through, there's a leap between 6 and 7.
Yeah, I haven't put the whole program in.
Because it looks, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, it looks linear, but
it's not.
I ask you in terms of effort, I don't think it's linear.
It's not, and it's at the top it says summary. I haven't included every single run session.
Right.
So in some of those weeks, instead of jumping, for example, from 10 minutes twice with a 3-minute walk, you'll find there's actually, at the beginning of the next week, I think it's actually 12 and a minute's walk and 12. So it's kind of like, these are where you're at the end of the week, not at the start of the week.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I've left some of it out, otherwise I was going to end up with this ridiculously busy slide.
So you're not doing the same thing every day?
No, there's actually even progression within a week. The first 3 weeks or so are like that, but then they progressively get a little bit more challenging as you go. And that's why if you go, oh, today's leap was a bit much, I'll go back a day. I've had friends that have done this and have repeated a week 5 times. It's taken them 5 times to get past week 5. And then they get to week 6 and they go, right. But then what they find is if it's taken them a long time to get over a bit in the middle, the rest of it becomes really, really easy because they've conditioned themselves and built their base up, built their fitness base up over that time. Like I said, there's no one smashing you over the head to say get it done. It's not like the zombies catch you and eat your brains. You just go ahead and you do it at your pace until you get there. But it's achievable, it's in small chunks. And look, for me, that was the beginning. And that was the first bit of technology. It was literally phone, wireless headphones, because I hate cables. So I had my wireless headphones on and I'd get the prompts. And I actually had some music that played. So the apps will actually play your music and then the voiceover will come in over your music and say, walk, run, or zombies close, zombies far, or whatever, depending on what you like.
So Anthony, question. The psychology literature generally says that to make a new habit from a non-existing habit takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks of consistency. And that's why I'm looking at your week 6 makes that big jump to week 7. So it looks as if by week 6 you've actually set it in the word would be concrete, but we're now saying neural circuitry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
Does that feel right for you?
Yeah, look, everyone I know that... it's very hard to... I don't want to extrapolate my experience into what everyone else feels, because clearly that's not going to be right. But it took me a few weeks where it became just natural to get up and go for a run. Like, at the moment, my knee's sore, and not going for a run feels really weird. Like, it just feels... I feel like, right, hang, my day's not started right. So fortunately now I'm back to running again, and but short runs and easy intervals and all that sort of stuff. But not running actually feels weird now. So not following the habit is worse for me, is harder for me than actually going through the habit. But yeah, I think you're right. And I don't think it's a secret that it's that length of time. I don't think there's any secret in why the sessions, gradually build up. I think it's all building on good psychology and habit building and that sort of stuff. And the other thing is that people's bodies react in very different ways to exercise. I found the first couple of weeks, the biggest thing that I had going on in the first couple of weeks was Achilles tendonitis. Like, my Achilles were tight and got sore. But, go past the second week and that actually went away because my body became accustomed to that level of training and exercise. So exercise is hard. Like, you don't sweat because it's easy. But if you can get that thing where you go, you know what, I've got to get past this first little bit of challenge, and then it becomes ingrained habit and it becomes easier for you to do. Charlie, you going to ask me something?
I have to say that not only psychologically but physiologically there's a component which you actually touched on.
Yeah, I think your body doesn't...
It takes some matter of weeks for your body to also adjust, this new thing is happening.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the other thing that happens here is, like, when I talk about that 108 kilos that I started at, I reckon I lost about 8 of those kilos in the first 5 weeks. Like, the weight literally fell off in that first few weeks. Like, the weight loss that I had was much slower after about the 6th week. I'll show you in a minute actually what that looked like.
Do you prefer a run program to a walk program because it takes less time out of the day?
No, I'm just a bit stupidly competitive. That's another thing that people say that I don't necessarily think is 100% accurate in every instance. But what I would say is, find what works for you, stick with it. If you enjoy it, don't do an exercise. People fall off exercise programs when they do stuff they don't like. People fall off exercise programs when they start a program without a goal or without a purpose. Like, there was a couple of things that went on. As I said, this is a personal thing. Things that were going on in my life. Look, I lost my dad 7 years ago. I lost my mum last year. Both my parents were obese, never exercised in their entire lives. I'm sitting there looking at my kids who are now all teenagers and sitting there thinking, I can't run out and play footy with my kids. Like, I can't go out and play basketball with my son without blowing a hammy in 10 minutes. I'm sitting there going, what are all these things that I could be doing and participate in their lives, I'm actually booking myself out of by sitting my bum and watching TV. So while I had a goal of getting healthier and fitter, the real goal was actually participating in life. And that became the thing that really was more important to me. So sorry, what was your... I don't know that I answered your question then, Charmian.
Just that a lot of... There's quite a lot of controversy about whether you should run or walk.
Yeah.
And that many people say that walking is a preferential thing, but
It can,
in today's society where there's not much time, to walk 6 kilometres takes about an hour and a quarter or something like that out of your day. Whereas if you can condense your 5k into running, then you can get your exercise program over in 30 minutes. And I just wondered whether that...
Time was never... I never really thought about it as, running was a time saver. I liked running, and look, the other thing is, I kind of get a bit competitive. Look, I used to... Back until in my early 30s, I played squash, and I played squash at a pretty high level. And I'm pretty sure I might be the only person I know who almost got into fisticuffs on a squash court. And I know it had happened in the past with other people, but I mean, basically I was smashing some guy and he made a comment, I go, just hurry up mate, it's almost done. And then he came over and tried to hit me. But I get fiercely competitive, and running is a way I can compete with myself. When I started doing the couch to 5k, the 30 minutes, I couldn't do 5k's in 30 minutes. Last October, I did 5k's in 25 minutes, which was a goal. Like, one of my goals was I want to be able to do 5-minute K's and hold them for 5k's. Like, I've run faster kilometres than that, but be able to actually sustain it for that length of time was a goal, so I got to that goal. So personal competition and social competition, that was the thing for me.
Do you check heart rate and
I'll talk about it in a sec.
pressure?
Yeah, don't check, but blood pressure's too hard. I mean, I can go and buy a $100 gizmo from the Apple store or something, but seriously, can't be bothered.
Anthony, just when you say you lost that weight in
The first bit, yeah.
few weeks, have you changed your diet at the same time?
I'll talk about all the stuff I do, yeah. Because like I said, there's a whole personal journey inside this that's wrapped up. It's not, and I want to make it really clear, the app was helpful, but the app wasn't the answer, There were other things that I went and got along the way. Like, I got this thing called the Nike Sports Band. So you can remember when I started doing this, things like Fitbit and Jawbone, they weren't out in the mainstream yet. You couldn't go and buy a fitness tracker. The other day, I think I was looking at the pile I've got at home, and I've got, I've had Jawbone, I've got a Fitbit, I've got something from Runtastic, I've got something from Strive. I've got a pile of these fitness trackers lying around now because they're I'm waiting for them to come out in the Nutrigrain box. Where you're just going to get them for free, because I think they're almost at that point where they're becoming such a commodity item. But I got this thing, the magic of this fitness band, I have to get away from the microphone for a second, is this do that, which is not just a logo for Nike, but it's actually a little module that fits inside your shoe. And it tracks, it's kind of like a pedometer which tracks your steps, but it also measures the amount of time your foot's on the ground. So if you think about it, when you walk, your foot's on the ground for that much time, but if you run, your foot's on the ground for a much shorter amount of time. So because it's able to track how long your foot's on the ground, is able to make an approximation of stride length and speed. So it gives you a better idea of what you're actually doing when you're running.
So it's the walking equivalent of a cadence and a bike.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good metaphor. It's that kind of thing. It's like you've thought about it and come up with the answer for me. I'll keep you around now. And that was kind of cool, but to be honest, after about 3 or 4 months of using that, I realised I really needed something much more high-tech, which I'll get into in a minute. But seriously, at this point, I've clearly been bitten by the bug, and I'm now well and truly into this exercise habit. By the time I got to the end of Couch to 5k, I was like, right, what's next? And to be honest, most of the time, it was just, the main goal was getting to this 5k target. So by April, so remember I started in January the 6th, by April I'm able to run 5 kilometres continuously. When I started, there was a park near where I lived called McAlpin Reserve, and it had a 700 metre, it's got a 700 metre trail inside the park, and all I was doing was running laps of this 700 metre trail. It took me a while to even just get psychologically comfortable with being able to run out on the road where people could look at me and laugh. Because it was like, I was overweight, I was unhealthy, I was battling to run for more than 60 seconds at a time early on. So the park was kind of a safe place to do that. And then once I got more comfortable and more confident, I started venturing out into the streets because I needed to do that to be able to make 5K slightly more exciting than running in laps in the same place. And it'd be great to be able to say I jumped on and went miles ahead all of a sudden, but it really took until last July for me to get to 10 kilometres. And that, I built up to that, and I did an event called Run Melbourne in the middle of last year. So you know the one, it's the one that really wrecks all the traffic on a Sunday in the middle of the year around the city. From that, I moved on to a half marathon by last October. So it was interesting. It took me a long time to get from 5Ks to 10Ks, but from 10 onwards, it's kind of like it's a doddle. Like you're in the it sounds really trite, but once you're in the habit, going from 10 kilometres on on the long run on the weekend to saying, right, well, next weekend I'm going to do 11. And you do 11 for a week, and then you go, right, I'm going to do 12. And you do 12. It was actually relatively easy mentally for me to add 1 kilometre at a time. In fact, when I'll talk about one of the longer runs I did later, I broke a very long run that I did into 5 kilometre runs in my head. The first time I ran 20 Ks continuously, I didn't run 20 Ks continuously. I ran 4 5 kilometre runs back to back. That's how I handled it in my head. Actually, I ran from Bentley to Brighton Beach. That was about 5 Ks. I ran 5 Ks along Brighton Beach. I ran 5 Ks back along Brighton Beach, and I ran 5 Ks back to Bentley. In my head, it's 4 5 kilometre. I'm not running a marathon later this year. I'm running 8 5 kilometre runs back to back. That's how my brain needs to be able to do it. So big tasks, small targets.
Anthony, did you do any pre-status measures by your physician in terms of chemistry, blood chemistry?
I just did normal stuff. Like, my doctor nags me every now and then. He sends me an email and goes, it's time for me to take some of your blood and see what's going on. But I did that. So I just did routine stuff. I didn't do anything special.
Like cholesterol, triglycerides?
Yeah, all that stuff.
Sort of stuff.
Yep. Yeah, all the normal stuff. I'm pretty careful. Because of my dad's history in particular, my dad had diabetes, Parkinson's, he had emphysema. What else did he have? I can't remember. He'd had a couple of strokes. He'd had a couple of major he had 2 major heart attacks. The second one was a biggie, was the one that he didn't wake up from. But like my dad's health history was pretty ordinary. My mum's wasn't great. He hadn't smoked for the last 30 years of his life, but he still had emphysema because 40 cigarettes a day from the time you're 20 to the time you're 45 does that to your body. But it was his long-term health history wasn't great. But obviously with diabetes and heart disease, there's lots of genetic markers around that as well. So my doctor is pretty careful about things like that. And particularly now, I know my daughter who's 18 has got type 1 diabetes. We kind of worry about stuff like that, and I'm pretty careful about it. So I got to October 2014. I did a 21.1 kilometre half marathon. The point of doing this half marathon was actually not to achieve a half marathon. The point of this half marathon was to qualify for something longer later, because I decided I was going to do something really long and stupid last January. But in order to get into this January race, I had to run a half marathon in a particular time. So this half marathon was one of the most boring runs I've ever done. The smile belies what was going on inside my head, but it was actually 4 5 kilometre circuits in order to get this 21 Ks out of the way. So that was a long... Does anyone recognise where I am?
Oh, you?
No. Who said Nagambie? Yeah, you're close. Bingo. It's Yarra. Yep. So that's Lake Mulwala in the background. And it was literally up and down one section of the bank of the lake. The point of doing this race was I had to do it in less than 2 hours and 15 minutes in order to qualify for this ridiculous endeavour that I did in January. It's kind of interesting because I kept setting myself these challenges. 5 Ks was a challenge, 10 Ks was a challenge. The half marathon was actually interesting because it was only a stepping stone to a bigger challenge. So most people go half marathon, that's a goal. But for me, half marathon was actually a means to this 28K race. Who likes the Mornington Peninsula? Everyone likes, most of us have been, everyone's been there, I assume. So everyone knows where Dromana is? Yep. Everyone knows where Cape Schank is? And everyone knows what's in the middle? Right? That big hill, Arthur Seat. That's what I ran. So I started in Dromana. That last hill, around the 28 to 30k mark, around that 28k mark, that's murder. So I did this 28k trail run with a couple of friends in January. It was January the 12th, I think, this year. We're fortunate that we took off and it wasn't too hot in the morning. It was only about 17 degrees. It got to about 30 about 20 minutes after I'd finished. The temperature really crept up. So that took 3.5 hours. 28 Ks, most of it single file trails over Arthur Seat. So if anyone knows that area and has gone walking through there or running through there, it's the Two Bays Trail. I'd have to say that's probably physically the hardest thing I've ever done. And it kind of made the decision to do a marathon in Queensland at the Gold Coast later this year easy, because I figure 28 Ks over those hills has got to be at least, probably not that much different in terms of level of difficulty and stress on my body as 42 Ks on a dead flat plain at the Gold Coast. At least that's what I'm telling myself. And don't dispel that myth for me. Yeah, so up and over. Yeah, that was pretty hard going. I wasn't smiling the same way that day. But I reckon I got some pretty good flexion happening on my quad there. So it's been a journey, all that stuff's just been, it's kind of interesting because even when I was preparing for that, I actually put weight on in the lead up to that, which was bizarre because my training volume went right up. I was going from running about 100 kilometres a month to running close to 180. And I got heavier. But I think it was because I was eating more, because I was running more, and I was, that cycle of what was going on. So the next goal is a marathon in July. And if my knee doesn't fix itself up in the next week, I'm going to have to revise that goal, unfortunately, but we'll see how that goes. So all that's kind of interesting, but I kind of think about it as the journey. So being able to do that has been a journey. I hadn't ridden a bike for fun since I was a kid. I now have a bike and I ride my bike all over the place. In fact, if I'd realised today, I would have brought on a train because I was working up the other end of the city this morning. I would have ridden down here instead of walking through the city in the rain this afternoon. But I take my bike, all those little 5k or 10k trips that I used to do in my car, I now do on my bike. And I seem to get there in about the same amount of time as it took me to drive everywhere. And I don't put all that black smoke in the thing, and I don't pay money at the Bowser all the time and all that sort of stuff. But kind of thinking about all this is, what's progress mean? Like when each one of us gets up and says we're going to do a thing, whatever that endeavour is, whether it's a project at work or it's get healthier, whatever that means for you, what is the progress? And the thing that I've found is that people tend to get hung up. Well, not everybody, I'm trying not to be universal when I say this, but people tend to get hung up on things that they can measure because they're easy to measure. And we see that, I saw that when I was working in the commercial world. We used to have things called KPIs, key performance indicators in the business. Why do we measure some KPIs? Because you can. It's the most stupid reason for doing everything is because we always have. When I've been in charge of teams and managed people, the surest way to raise my ire at a staff meeting was when I ask someone, why do you do this? And they go, because we always have. It's the worst answer I can get. If they said to me, look, we get that it's a crappy process, but we have to do it because Bob up the road doesn't work, won't do his thing unless we deliver it to him in this way, I can live with that. I can live with bad processes with purpose. I can't live with them when there's no reason for doing them. So I got to trying to think about how do I actually work on measuring my the progress I've made. And that kind of led me down this other rabbit hole, which we can talk about. I haven't got any slides, I wasn't planning to talk about, but we can talk about later separately, called the quantified self movement, which I find fascinating. I know you've probably read plenty about this.
We've been to a couple of meetings.
Yeah, I reckon it's fascinating. I love it.
Now, the other trouble with this group is they're quantifying all their stuff, but they can't arrive punctually at a meeting.
No.
Go figure. They're measuring everything about their body. If you think about it, all those measurements are all timed measurements. How often does something happen? How frequent, whatever.
Yeah.
They can't arrive at a meeting on time.
You know, because they're busy measuring everything else.
Too busy measuring.
So,
Let us know.
so the easiest thing people use to measure is, like, I can measure how far I can run and how fast I can run, but the key one that people tend to focus on when they're talking about their health and well-being is their weight. And I note, you know, that when we promoted this talk, one of the key things we focused on was my weight, how much weight I'd lost. Because it's easy. It's easy to measure. Everyone gets it. Like, if I say to someone, what does 25 kilos look like? Most people will know bag of cement or side of beef or something. You'll have something in your head that you go, I get what 20 kilos is. I can quantify that and understand it. But it's pretty easy to work out what 20 kilos is. And what's interesting is that if you get hung up, and this is where the quantified self thing gets really weird to me, is that if you get hung up on micro-measuring yourself all the time, you'll get really, really frustrated. Because even if you look at this, on this graph, like that's the beginning on the 7th of January 2013, and that's the other end is last week. There are peaks and troughs along, you know, I mean, there's a downward trend for sure, but there were good days and bad days in the middle of that.
Still, you'd be happy about that point, wouldn't you?
Well, and interestingly, when I weighed, I thought I'd better actually check this out and see what happens. When I weighed myself last Friday and when I weighed myself today, there's a 1.5 kilo difference. And it wasn't a good difference. But if I got hung up on every time the weight moved up and down by a kilo, I'd go nuts. I'd get really frustrated. So the thing is, measure it as often as you like, but don't look at the number until you've got a trend line that you can look at. And you can see that it was a bit ordinary in that period of time. My weight crept up and stayed up. So I almost gained 10 kilos back in that time. But I've dropped most of that 10 kilos this year.
So did you weigh yourself between...
Yeah, I did, but I had a bit of missing
where
data.
it's a straight line?
There's a
Did you
bit...
weigh yourself then? Or
Yeah,
is
there's a
that-
couple of spots where I moved house, didn't have access to my scales
Right.
and stuff like that. So I don't have quite the same number of readings for that period of time. But it kind of doesn't matter because I got a reading at the start and a reading at the end. You can see the line might have wavered in between. But that's where I am, you know, the numbers don't lie. Data doesn't lie. Back in my early professional life when we're talking about how to, you know, looking at business performance, the data never lies. Bob's intuition versus Bob's numbers may not be the same thing. The numbers are always right, intuition's rarely right.
I'd say the first bit is a hyper-focused.
Yeah, there is. There's a hyper...
And then there's
Yeah. Oh, I had this...
a slight disappointment. because
Yeah.
it's
And look, the other thing is...
there's lots of focus and then you've gone into...
Well, I had this whole little thing called divorce going on in the middle of it all as well, which kind of made life interesting. I also had my mum's illness through all of that sort of period as well. So focus is a big deal. Even that when my mum was really ill and she was in palliative care, I was still running every other day and all that sort of stuff. But obviously, you know, we're spending a lot of nights at hospitals ordering pizza because it was the only thing we could get delivered into the hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning for dinner and stuff like that. So, I mean, lots of things were going on. Well, I kind of started thinking about it and I go, what I started to find was that the things that were most valuable for me in terms of my overall health and well-being were actually the things that were kind of not as easy to track and measure. Like I can measure my weight easily. You can buy a set of scales. I can measure my body fat relatively easily these days. There's a whole bunch of things that you can measure, but their value seems to be harder to quantify as they become more important. Like how I feel, my mood is probably the most important thing to me. Like if I feel comfortable and happy in myself, that's a good thing. Can someone give me an easy way to quantify my mood at any given point in time?
Well, there are some apps that will actually let you, but it's all self-report.
Yeah, and it's introspective. You've got to really think about it.
Mood you're talking about.
Yeah.
Get a mood ring.
Yeah, thanks. No, anyway. But even like, you know, sleep quality and quantity are really important. I notice a really big difference. I was saying to some of the people before, I notice a really big difference in how I work and how I train and everything else on how long I sleep and how well I sleep. I can have a really great sleep for 4 hours and still feel like rubbish that morning. Like I have a good, measurably deep sleep according to my Fitbit, and if it wasn't long enough, it just wasn't long enough. If I don't get 6 or 7 hours at least, Doesn't matter how good that sleep was. I actually need the quantity. And actually measuring and being able to see that and then track it against how I felt has been one of the interesting things. The thing I found most frustrating is that very few health apps and devices talk to each other well. It's a real frustration where I can get something that can tell me how well I slept, but to correlate that with how well I ran the next morning is actually not that easy to do. I've got to go and get the data, and I've got to do the mashup myself. There's very few things that actually, I haven't found an effective service that can take multiple bits of data about health and actually smush them together to give you some meaningful insight.
So what's your best sleep period?
In terms of how much sleep I need?
Yeah.
I need 7 or 8 hours. That's how much I need to sleep.
Yeah, the BBC has an article on at the moment saying that 9 hours is bad for you. It's best between 6 and 8.
Yeah, I find that, look, it depends on what's going on. Like if I'm jet lagged, there's no amount of sleep in the world that's enough sleep for me at that moment. But if I feel okay and I'm well rested, and if I've had an 8-hour sleep, I can go back-to-back 7-hour sleeps for 4 or 5 days and still feel okay. It's when I've got a 3 or 4 hour sleep night because I've been out or whatever, or just had a restless night's sleep because it's been too hot or whatever. That really makes a big difference, and I notice it.
It's interesting that sleep has been underestimated and overlooked to some extent in terms of health. If you look at all these psychological conditions that we would label as being poor psychological health, every one of them has sleep disturbances, one of the qualities.
Yeah, sleep is incredible. I talk to guys that, and one of my nephews, for example, Luke, he's competing in a strongman competition this week. So give me a picture of Luke. Does everyone watch those World's Strongest Man competitions? Seen those? All right, so you get these guys, typically Scandinavian guys win it, and Eastern European guys, Icelanders, and Eastern European guys win it, do quite well at it as well. These are guys that are, Luke's a small version of one, okay? So he's 6'2", 6'1", 6'2", would weigh something like 125 or 130 kilos, right? And he's like a stone. He's this thick, and he's this broad, and his legs, and he's massive. I'll pump up a video of him later. At his last competition, he was lifting a Mercedes 4-wheel drive, right? So they had it on a hoisty, they had it like on a device, and he stood there, and he went, and he lifted it 7 times in 90 seconds. All the way to the ground, all the way up. Right? That's what these guys are. Now, he's stupidly strong. But if I go and put him on a BMI, if I go and measure his body mass index, which is a measure of your height and your weight, he's morbidly obese. Right? Seriously, if you walk into Luke, you'll think you've walked into a brick wall. Right? So some of these measures you've got to take them with a grain of salt. Some of them are easy. Like I think strength and stamina are pretty easy to measure, and I think they're actually quite valuable things. At least to me, I think being strong, having stamina, being reasonably flexible, I think they're good things to aspire to and to have just from a general health point of view. I think things like how much you weigh, easy to do. I don't think it's actually all that important. I don't think your weight's the key. I know that there's plenty of health markers based around height, weight sorts of measures. But I'd rather be fat and fit than skinny and unfit. And that's one of the things that you sort of see coming through in the literature now. They're calling, there are people who are, you see like the supermodel types who are really, really thin. Everyone's got friends who are naturally carry less weight than others, but they're not necessarily any fitter or healthier. So weight, measure with centimetre, body measurements, useful, but ultimately I'm still carrying a spare tyre, but I'd rather have that and be fit than to be really, really skinny and not be able to run for 15 minutes. That sort of thing. Body mass index, I think it's probably the most overused and poorly used measure that we have for our health and fitness today. Body fat's kind of interesting. The scales that I've got at the moment, one of the perks of my job is that I get good toys to play with. So Fitbit sent me their ARIA scales a couple of weeks ago, and they're quite fun because when you set them up, they connect to your Wi-Fi network and all this sort of stuff. In the morning, you stand on your scales, It weighs you, measures your body fat through basically by running some energy through your body and measuring the impedance. So the fatter you are, there's a variation in how that signal transmits through your body. Through Wi-Fi, it flicks it back up to your Fitbit account, and when I look on the phone, 5 minutes later, my weight and body fat are there. Kind of useful. Apparently I'm in the fit range, but I was in the fit range on Friday, but I was in the unfit range on Monday because it varies depending on how well hydrated you are. So again, you'll go nuts if you look at day-by-day measurements. It's about big trends. Look at the trend line over a period of 6 months or whatever. The one that's interesting is the in and out. That's how much you eat versus how much energy you expend. It's actually, I had that in the middle because I actually think it's pretty important to know what you eat. One of the most important tools, I'm going to talk about tools that I use in a minute. I have a set of scales on my kitchen bench and it never gets put away. And when people come over and see me prepare my food, they think I'm a bit anal about it, but I do actually measure out how much breakfast cereal I have in the morning. And I do weigh how much fruit I stick in the bowl. Because I've got a sweet tooth, I have to admit, and if I get breakfast cereal, I'm happy to fill the bowl up. I watched my son eat breakfast the other day. He's 16 years old. Everyone who's had a 16-year-old son knows what that's like, knows what it's like watching them eat. He watched me weigh out 45 grams of Sultana brand into my bowl. And just for a joke, I said, let's weigh your breakfast, Josh. And I weighed how much food he put in his bowl, and it was 1 kilo. All right, so I had 45 grams of cereal. I'll tell you, it was 5 prunes, 50 grams of strawberries, some blueberries, some raspberries, and 150 mils of milk. That was my breakfast. He had 900 grams in this bowl of, I think it was 8 wheat picks, Sultana brand over the top of it. I can't remember what else. And that was the entree, right? Because then he went to pancakes after that. So, and it's really annoying because he's 16 years old, he's nearly my height, and he's about as thick as my finger. It's just crazy. But I think I find that measuring the amount of food I eat is useful because it teaches me, it's taught me portion control. It means that when I actually go out and I'm travelling, I know that 1 handful of cereal is it's all I actually need. Like filling up the bowl looks good, but 1 handful is actually is close enough to 45 grams for me, and that's what I need to eat. And it goes the same thing, I know that I can eat that much for breakfast, and I know that I can have 2 rolls for lunch, and I know that I can have a piece of meat and some vegetables for dinner, and I know that I haven't overeaten. I actually haven't eaten more calories than what I'm expending through my normal day. The magic number for me is about 1,800 calories in per day. But a day like today where I went for a run this morning and I did a spin class this afternoon, I'm going to eat a bit more today because I'm hungry. Like, seriously, I want all the food right now. But it's kind of interesting. I think the things that are valuable, I think you've got to work out what things are valuable to you to measure and find ways to measure them. I think it's tempting to start with what's easy rather than what's worth doing. So, tools. The stuff that I use, my iPhone, which I've got tucked away in my bag at the moment. The app that I've got on there at the moment is MyFitnessPal. Now, the reason MyFitnessPal does lots of stuff. It'll track your exercise, and there's a blog, and there's a social element where you share status updates about how you're going with the rest of your friends. It's kind of like Facebook for fitness, kinda. But that element of it I've completely don't bother with. It's kind of completely useless to me. The thing that's actually really useful in MyFitnessPal is its food tracking capacity. It's got the best food database of any app that I've tried. If there's one that's out there that's better, I'm all ears. The nifty thing about it is that I can sit there and go, I'm going to eat the Coles light tasty sliced cheese. How many calories is in a slice of cheese? No, I don't know. But with the app, I can barcode scan the box, and it has that data in it. The app comes back and says to me, 1 slice of cheese, 74 calories, or whatever it is. So I know what I'm putting in my food. Anything that I can't remember a thing that I've bought at the supermarket that is not in their database. Now, even though it's an American database, It seems to have everything Australian in it.
What's it called?
MyFitnessPal, all one word. The other thing that's been really that I like with it is there's stuff that I like to cook. So, for example, when my kids come over, we'll make. Last weekend we made raspberry white chocolate muffins. So I can actually tell MyFitnessPal where the recipe is online. It'll go and grab the ingredients and tell me, and put it together and actually tell me one muffin is 174 calories. So it'll actually, for food that my own recipes, it'll calculate what's in them, and it'll tell me the fat, the protein, the sugar, and the blah, blah, blah for all those food, for that as well, based on the ingredients, and it puts it together for me. So I can actually use this to track my food relatively closely. The other reason I like MyFitnessPal is that it talks to just about every other fitness app that's out there. So it's got an open API programming tool so that other apps can go and get that piece of information. So the other app that I use is the Fitbit app. So Fitbit will track my steps, and because it's got a heart rate monitor, this Fitbit's got a heart rate monitor in it, it's able to measure how many calories I've expended during the day. And it can go and get how many calories I've eaten from MyFitnessPal, and it can tell me whether I've eaten more than I've used, or vice versa. So I can sit there and go, you know what? Today I ate 50 calories more, or 100 calories more, or I went to a wedding on the weekend, I'm pretty sure I ate 1,000 calories more than I spent, than I'd expended. But I know that today the equation's tipped back the other way because of the amount of exercise I've done and what I have eaten. So MyFitnessPal and Fitbit are the two key apps for me. And I've pretty much got it down to, those are the two that I use most often. I'll talk about Apple Health in a sec. You'll notice the Fitbit scales are up the top there. My kitchen scales I use all the time. My bike I've mentioned before. I'm not a mammal, by the way. I refuse to wear Lycra. This is what I wear when I run on a really cold morning. I won't wear Lycra when I cycle. I just wear a pair of shorts. I haven't quite got to the mammal thing yet. The watch on the left is my sport watch. So when I go running, I've got this Nike watch which talks to a heart rate monitor, and it's got a GPS in it. So it can actually measure where I've run and how far I've run. So at the moment, because I'm doing injury recovery, I'm only running 700 metres on, 300 metres off at the moment in intervals. So I can sit there and go, right, 700 metres, walk. Walk for 300, start running again. So I can use that watch. I can set it to automatically say you're going to do 7-minute intervals or whatever it is. So I can actually tell it what I want to do before I go out on a run, and it'll beep at me when I've got to change what I'm doing. It's kind of interesting because Nike and Apple have obviously got this fairly close relationship, but they don't seem to be working all that well together at the moment, has been my experience with their tools. So the Nike watch has got its own app as well, so I can actually look at how far I've run over the month, what my average speed's been and all this sort of stuff, and you can go into challenges against other people and all that sort of stuff as well. But mainly I use it just to track how I'm going.
Do you think the Apple Watch is going to change the relationship even worse?
You'll find out in a minute. I had up there before, before I just changed something there, I had the Jawbone fitness tracker on there. I'm not in the business of slagging off companies and products. It's not what I typically do. But between me and my partner, we've had 5 Jawbone bracelets, and they've all gone back as defective. And they've all suffered the same defect. The way the Jawbone thing works is it sits on your wrist and it's got a rubber casing around it. And we've found in 5 out of 5 that we've had, the rubber has expanded over time, and it's expanded to the point where it actually goes over the button on the end, which you need to be able to push to do things, so you can't push the button. And for 2 of those, the rubber's expanded so much it's actually forced the button to fall off and make the thing not work. So we've had a couple of different Jawbones between us, and we've given them up. So I've actually moved to the Fitbit, this is the new one that came out early this year, which I paid for. I didn't get given to me as a freebie. But this is a Fitbit Charge HR. So it tracks my steps, tells me the time, which is handy. Gives me some limited phone notifications. So if I've got an inbound phone call, I can actually see who it is on the watch. But it's got a heart rate monitor built into it. So I can tap the screen and know that at this moment while I'm talking to you, oops, went too far. My heart rate's 71 beats a minute. So, and that's kind of handy because I have that on all the time. It's on when I sleep, so it's able to measure how well I've slept. So based on how much movement I have during my night, it'll tell me whether I've been particularly restless or restful. I don't have to push a button or anything. It seems to know when I fell asleep, and it knows when I woke up. So it gives me a measure of how long I've been sleeping each day, and I can look at that over the course of a week or a month. But like I said, it'd be really nifty to be able to take how well I slept and then map it against my running to see if there's correlations between good and bad days running with how much sleep I've had and what I've eaten. You know, because I'm a bit of a data nerd, it'd be great to be able to say, you know, last Wednesday I ate, 60 grams of protein through the day. I slept for 8 hours and I ran really well. But the next time I ran, I only had 40 grams of protein. I slept for 6 hours. I slept the same amount, but I ran better, that sort of thing. So be able to take some data and start to make some meaningful correlations across different apps would be great, but no one's done it yet. It's interesting. The thing about the tools, and it's really easy for me as a professional nerd to get wrapped up in the tech, it's got to not get in the way of what you're doing. I did a class this morning at Virgin Active. I mentioned to a few people before. I did a spin class. So it's basically indoor cycling. So you're on a kind of exercise bike. And the reason I went to Virgin Active is they got these all new bikes. They're brand new. They've set up a new studio, and these are the new fancy bikes. What was interesting about these bikes was we went through a calibration process at the beginning that worked out basically how powerfully I could cycle for a period of time. So effectively what it did is every 4 minutes, the intensity increased until I got to a point where I couldn't hold 4 minutes at a level of intensity. So then it gave me a score of how strong I was for this particular activity. Then for the rest of the class, what it did was, what the instructor said was, right now I want you to cycle for the next 2 minutes in the green zone. So because it knew what my strength was, the green zone was calibrated against my particular need, or my particular strength. Whereas the person next to me, their green zone may have been a higher level of intensity or a lower level of intensity depending on their fitness and everything else that was going on. Now that was a good example of how the technology doesn't get in the way, because we didn't have to do anything. Once the class started, I didn't have to fiddle with knobs and dials and push buttons and blah, blah, blah to make it work. It just worked. My sport watch works because once I start running, all I have to do is actually press the start button and I'm off. And it's doing all the other measuring. If I need to see something, I can look down at it and I press one button, I can see my heart rate. I press one button, I can see how fast I'm going. I press one button, I can see how far I've travelled. I don't have to sit there and fiddle with a touch screen and, find an app and mess around with it. I know it's a single purpose device and it just lets me do what I'm meant to be doing. It doesn't get in the way. I think it's tempting to try to find, sometimes you get an app, and some of the fitness apps I've seen do extraordinarily complex things, but that's their problem. They're too hard to use. Like I want to look at one thing and then to go and do something else, I've got to flick through to do something else. It's one of the reasons I won't run with an iPhone, because while I can probably get all the information I want with an app on my phone, it's too hard to use while I'm running, because I've got sweaty fingers and potentially I'm running on a cold day and I've got gloves on and I'm bouncing around, and if I drop it and blah, blah, blah. So I've gone for, the devices I use are actually relatively simple. Most of them are single purpose things. Probably the most complex thing I do is I take my phone on my bike and I've jerry-rigged a bike mount for my iPhone using an OtterBox case. So it sits on the handlebars of my bike and the Strava app is running all the time, so I can see how far I've travelled and that sort of stuff. And it's kind of handy because I have a Bluetooth headset, so if someone rings me I can answer the phone. But I kind of try to keep it as simple as I can, because I think you don't want the apps to make your life harder. You want them to make your life easier. And some apps make things harder. So, Apple Health. I'm not yet convinced. And I think it's because it's a version 1. And that's not to say I don't think it's completely useless. But for my purposes, it doesn't actually give me any value. I actually find it's harder to use than most of the other fitness apps that are out there. It seems to be less reliable in terms of data moving from other apps into it. There seems to be, for example, I was trying to send data to it from, I was playing with Runkeeper and I was playing with MyFitnessPal, and getting them to send data to Apple Health so I could look at health and go, right, I've got everything aggregated in one place. But it didn't, the data didn't seem to get there all at the right time. Like sometimes something would arrive there instantly, and then sometimes it would take an hour to get there. I found trying to correlate data, which I thought was going to be the big promise, you know, that I would get data from multiple sources and be able to do that aggregation and comparison. It just doesn't do it. Like everything's on a separate graph. I can get 3 graphs lined up, but I'm limited to how much I can even see because of the size of the screen on my phone. I'm kind of hoping they get it better over time, but at the moment I've just found it to be somewhat frustrating to use and a bit limited. It's interesting, I get everything I need now pretty much out of the Fitbit app, because it goes and gets the food data out of my MyFitnessPal for me, and everything else it just does. And it's interesting that Apple has withdrawn Fitbit from all its stores, because Fitbit have said integrating with Apple Health is not on our roadmap. And pretty much as soon as that statement got made, Apple pulled them out of the store, online and physical stores. Which is fair enough. I mean, you know, it's Apple Store, they can do whatever they like. But it was kind of interesting. And plus, obviously, the Apple Watch is a competitive product, and they didn't want to have anyone else's product competing with their own in the stores. I think it's got capacity to be a great product in the future, but I don't think it's there yet. I think the Apple Watch will buoy its popularity and use. But I think it's not quite there yet. It may be better in version 2 or 3, but not now. And the Apple Watch, I wrote something about this the other day. It's one of those things, I've got a briefing with Apple tomorrow, and I asked them to send me one, and they said no. Probably because I didn't write nice things about it initially. I'm the first to admit, I'm not smart enough to work out all the ways this thing could work and be useful to people. My experience of smartwatches in general has been pretty negative. I've had a number of them, and the reason I say it's been pretty negative is that there doesn't seem to be anything really special that the watch does that I can't get in other ways. I kind of find the idea of the way most people use smartwatches today, and it's granted it's a today thing, not an Apple Watch thing, is a call comes in and they can look at it, and they'll see who's calling. They'll get a text message and they can read it. Potentially they can press a couple of buttons and send a prefab reply back to that. There is some apps out there for other smartwatch platforms, but they seem to be fairly limited, and I think that's because most of the smartwatches that are out there have got probably not the most sophisticated hardware in the world. I think Apple's probably going to up the ante quite substantially in terms of what the hardware is capable of doing. But from a health and fitness point of view, which is how I'm looking at it at the moment, it's not waterproof. My sport watch is. Like I can go for a run down at Brighton Beach and then decide to take my runners off and jump in the water for 20 minutes, and I have to worry about my watch. With the Apple Watch, I can't do that. It doesn't have a GPS in it, so if I want to go out for a run, I have to carry my phone with me. And I generally don't like carrying my phone with me when I run because it's another thing to carry. I've got enough to carry without having to add stuff to the pile. It's got some value. In terms of, if I was using it purely from a health and fitness point of view, I can get what it does from a health and fitness point of view from other places. You know, I've got a Fitbit, I can track my steps, I can track my heart rate at less than half the price. Now, there might be other apps that come through for the Apple Watch that change that equation for me. But for me, the value of the iPhone is not the iPhone. The value of the iPhone is the entire ecosystem that's been built around it now. And the value of the iPad's a nice piece of hardware, but it's useless without software. The same thing will be said for the Apple Watch. The value of the watch will come from the apps. And if some great apps come through and the hardware catches up with GPS and waterproofing, then version 2 or version 3, they might get the $500 out of my pocket, but not at the moment. We had a couple of questions as we've gone. I actually don't have a whole lot more to say from a structured presentation point of view. So I'm happy to throw it open to some questions.
Anthony, the metabolism of one person to run 10Ks, are they going to use more calories or less than another person, or is it a physical
well,
nexus?
in general, the amount of, because remember, calories are just a measure of energy. Okay? So the amount of energy you need to move for 10 kilometres largely doesn't vary whether you're running fast or slow. There is variation because you're doing different stuff with your body, but it's not a massive, it's not like running 10Ks will burn 5 times as many calories as walking 10Ks. You know, there is a difference, but it's not a massive difference. I think from a physiological point of view, you probably will burn a little bit differently, but I mean, the number of calories I will burn running 10Ks next to another person who's 5'10" and weighs the same as me running the same 10Ks will be different because we'll have different muscle mass in our bodies, for example. We'll process it differently. You know, some people, you know, everyone's got friends who can eat whatever they like and stay skinny, and they've got other people who look at food and get fat. You know, I look at sweets and put on weight. My son looks at sweets and eats, you know. Excuse me, I'm just going to change my glasses because the orange hue, as much fun as it's been so far, is doing my head in a little bit. So, you don't all have suntans anymore. So yeah, from that point of view, from a physiological point of view, I don't think it makes a huge difference. I think when you get down to that sort of stuff, I think the goal is not how many calories you burn. I think it's the fact you actually just did it. I think that's, you know, for me, when I go for a run, I don't sit there and go, I'm going to go on a 1,400 calorie run or ride today. I just go, you know, I'm going to run for half an hour or 45 minutes or 10Ks or whatever. But for me, it's just, that's the goal. So the calories are kind of like another thing that's easy to measure. And I don't think there's no device out there that consumers get easy access to that will measure the number of calories you burn during an activity accurately anyway. They're all approximations based on height, weight, gender, age. You know, I love it when you get a year older because if I can stay at the same height and weight as I get a year older, I theoretically move further up the fitness percentiles for my age group. It's like if you know what, if I can keep running until I'm 95, I might actually win a, you know, Veterans Olympics event or something like that. So yeah.
I think you mentioned your 18-year-old daughter has type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
Is she using a pump, and have you done any research into?
She uses pens. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We've talked about apps and we've talked about devices. There are blood glucose meters you can buy that integrate with an iPhone. So you plug them into your iPhone and, you know, prick your finger, put the blood in, and it gets read and automatically fed into the iPhone. We haven't gone down that road, mainly because it's just another thing to have. Like she's still, up until later this year, is going to be at the Children's for her regular treatment and stuff and checkups and things. So she's just got a normal blood glucose meter. She's got 2. So she just pricks her finger, measures, and then she's got the glucose glucose pens. So she just goes, I need, you know, 18 milligrams or whatever, 18 mils or whatever it is. Turns them off, stabs and done, or I stab her or something like that. So from that point of view, you could have more tech involved, but it's one of those spots where you go, what's the value? You know, there's some really interesting stuff going when you talk about health monitoring for people with chronic conditions. I interviewed the guy in charge of a Telstra service called My Health Point the other week for a story. That's a really interesting service that Telstra's doing in working with certain healthcare providers and healthcare equipment makers. So has anyone heard about it or know about it? So example what they do is, for example, they might deal with might have a patient with a chronic heart condition. Right? So that person's seen their doctor and they need to regularly measure their pulse rate and regularly measure their blood pressure. So at the moment, if you want your doctor to know what your blood pressure is, you've got 2 options. One is you go to the doctor and he does it, or she does it, or you do it at home and you email it to them. Right? And that kind of gets tiresome because pretty soon you get sick of doing it. When you forget to send the email bounces and the doctor's busy, he doesn't read the email, blah, 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 all that stuff happens. So this My Health Point service what they've done is they've worked with equipment manufacturers. So Telstra has now modified some of their routers, home router products, with they've got Bluetooth in them. So people go and do the measurement. So they'll use a blood pressure cuff and measure their blood pressure, or take their, measure their heart rate, and it will automatically transmit from the device into the router, and then get sent to an aggregation service that holds onto it. Now, the doctor doesn't want to know every reading, right? Doctor only wants to know when something's going wrong. Healthcare is management by exception when you start to deal with data like that. So they'll have trend data, and they'll look at this person's heart, blood pressure immediately, 120 over 80, 120 over 80, 120 over 80, 122 over 90, 123 over 90, 124 over 90. They'll see a trend, and that'll send an alert, and the doctor goes, hang on, this person's medication's not working, or they've gone off their medication, or we're not getting readings. We need to check up with them. We need to get a local nurse or nursing service or a local doctor to actually check up on this person. So they're actually working with healthcare providers on that. And they're working, for example, with health insurance companies, because health insurance companies have got an interest in keeping you healthy, because then they just collect money and don't have to put it out. So the health insurance companies are actually getting in on this, because they go, it's a good way for patients to self-manage and make sure that their doctors are in the loop so that they can avoid us completely. We don't have to give you money. So that's an interesting service. Apple were talking about doing this with certain healthcare providers. And when they did the big health thing, was it 18 months ago, a year ago, when they released Apple Health? Last year?
Last year.
About a year ago. That was one of the big things, was they were working with places like the Mayo Clinic and so on in the US. And that's where the new research kit stuff becomes interesting as well.
So I'll just let you know that last week at the Alfred, there is a meetup group on health tech, and it's pitching itself at a very high level of research. And it took place at the Alfred Hospital, one of the new units there, and the CSIRO were invited down to show what they're doing in the field of health. We tend to think of CSIRO as plants and clouds and stuff. They've got this huge section now on health, and I took some pictures. They have two that were of interest to me. One was called ImproMy. They've actually done the data, they've done the research. You should look into this. ImproMy, weight loss program developed in collaboration with CSIRO, and they will actually take the group and they actually hook them up with a one-on-one consultant, live consultant. And the other thing they did, they developed an app for cardiac rehabilitation post-event.
And so there's some really great stuff.
So CSIRO, you should look it up.
I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I saw some fascinating stuff around remote health monitoring that NICTA was developing as well. And sadly, NICTA's losing its federal funding next year, which is a bit of a tragedy. But they were doing all sorts of things around monitoring of people. So by using implants for certain conditions, to be able to send information directly out to healthcare providers and healthcare professionals. The thing is, for a lot of things, you don't need doctors for everything. Sometimes all you actually need is someone to pick up the phone and check that the person's taking their medication. Because sometimes with some people they may forget or whatever it is. And so if you've got a set of readings that start to be out of normal for that person, all you actually need is someone to follow it up. And then it gets escalated to a doctor or some other healthcare professional if needed. Yeah. But there's all sorts of really fascinating stuff going around the monitoring. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we're in early days, again, the situation that we're in 20 years now. A lot of this is really V1 data and such, and the next few years are going to be pretty interesting.
I think that's true. It's kind of interesting because we always think, in a couple of years' time or 5 years' time, it's going to be much, much better. I think that time never comes. It's like Americans getting rid of the metric system. We've just got to wait for all the old people to die and they'll have a chance at it. But
no, we still like
But it's kind of interesting. I think there's a couple of things that have changed, particularly over the last 5 years, which I think make this stuff far more possible today than it ever has. And I think one of them is machine learning and AI is now reaching a point where machines can look at normal and understand normal versus abnormal in a far more nuanced way than they ever had before. I think we've got better tools for doing analytics. We can actually store the masses of data now. I mean, back in my day, when I was a kid, I worked on a data warehousing project in probably 1996, 1997. And I remember going into an absolute battle with my CIO to buy a 40 gigabyte hard drive to store the data. Right? It was, no, I'm trying to think, it might have been an 8 at that time. It's probably about 8. What do you reckon, Rob? 1995, 8 gigs would have been more realistic? I remember going to
more like
war
8
over 8 gigs. I don't mean, it's like, it was war. It was like, you're going to spend $3,000 on this drive. And I go, no, I actually want 2 because I need redundancy. And what? Yeah, you know, I'll take it out of your pay, all this sort of crap. And it was dealing with data was a really big concern. Whereas now, you sit there and go, oh, terabyte drive. I walked into a shop. I walked into a J-car in Yarrawonga over Christmas to buy a 1 terabyte drive.
Because that's what you do, of course.
Well, I needed it because it was important. But you know, you can go and buy a terabyte of storage anywhere you like.
I want to thank Anthony, who, as usual, has covered a very broad range of ideas, but put a very personal spin on it. And we don't get that often in what we do here, and being very self-effacing about it, and perhaps motivated some of us to get off our asses and do something. What do you think? That would be a nice outcome.
Well, I don't want to tell anyone what to do or how to do it.
Yes, you do. That's what you do for a living. Come on.
No, I inform people.
Okay, yes, you inform people.
But it was funny, my original plan was to actually come here in normal work clothes and strip down to this for something different. But I had too much stuff to carry in my backpack to have